So, I don't know if I should be giving out my notes to you beforehand. It's turning into a little bit of a long accident, I think. On the last shuffle, I felt like I was bobbing around different attempts at what I was planning on saying in some regard for presentation's sake. We are at war, though, in so many ways that we need to be seeking restoration and reconciliation, recognition. And I wrote this as the hot take, and as I've geared up to do my version of it, it's like, man, am I saying this such as a declaration of war and to describe the nature and the ways in which I think we should be looking at it more directedly? I don't think so. I don't think it's necessarily my place to, but I know that I really wanted to make the claim amongst it at that time that it seemed to be the lock and set towards getting this episode's ideological front together. So, as you think about the ways in which we are fighting and what's most important to us, I hope you know that none of us individually are going to have the answer. And we need to look at it at a scale of intensity and with gracefulness towards the attitudes in which we can, at the times in which we're presented with the reality of that war. And to know that war isn't a new thing is maybe a starting point. Though, this week I wanted to give thanks to the news, actually, and the nows. And with that slight letter change between those two words, I think you can maybe start to watch news broadcasts with the occasional little reminder that some of the things that you're seeing are not news. They're largely things that have already been here, but every once in a while we do see new things. And it's an important distinction to make as we are perturbed by the sense of those things, and to create noticeable awareness of our world. I think it is perfect towards the integral approach of our actions to understand that. But might we figure our way out of war? And in my opinion, humble opinion, I think it has to start with the ideological front of how you are conducting your beliefs. And one of the ideas that's come this week is the idea of a truce. And within a truce, there is so deemed a whole load of firepower, but to not edge into that conflict or reignite the expression of that conflict is a pinnacle of the actions that we can take. Whether we tip towards the chaos or find resolution within the bounds of our means. Things like directing attacks in disbelief and holding on to knowledges that are challenged at the time, even in regards to what both of our political parties and world perspectives abounding might present with us. We're being called to examine our individual self's place in the world. And I know that we can grow so much out of this time, and with the advances that technology and our spiritual oneness present. Though, let's get to this week's episode. Thoh'ssa-ry. What began as a play on the word thought, with a T missing at the end, thoughts, and then with insight jumped to Thoh'ssa-ry. Bridge the gap into an available comparison with glossary, and finding the root of that word to be glossa, with the meaning of tongue, it invites one to think that thosa might be seen as the mind's tongue, the area of the brain that articulates the motion of an ideological center in our common understanding of the world in which we live. I seek to explore the current occurrency of normal typicality within our mental modes of cognition. I've recorded sound bites to the sound effects of various frequent happenings that I believe will most help a shaping of advance into further parts of speech by looking at where those words of ours start, the events of change that give us pause. I will use those effects in effect to build each weekly episode onto a based segmentation of what comes to inspire best a partition of the week's news and considerable perspective writings that with every prayerful sighting might bring an evolved ability to adorn our expressions of the language in use with greater fluidity and meaning and complexity toward progression. So, with each episode building a more developed approach and ultimately a larger sequencing of our communication, I will examine the bigger points of view and present a glossary of thinking that, with diligence, aligns missing pieces to the puzzle that is society's confusing mix of histories in a form that I think helps put edge to edge and befitting in many flexibilities, gives access to deeper purposing when it seems most impossible at present to see music in the messy with any clarity. Thoh'ssa-ry. apiLeast'r. Episode 7. apiLeast'r. apiLeast'r. This is a word that comes from an old inspiration and one that I can't quite put a finger on, but I do know that I appreciated it because it kind of represented a few different words at once. And it's most definable within this week's episode as the left side of the word before the L, API, and to the right, apiLeast'r. And without the E, if you're thinking about the holiday, and the L operating within what I've found as a new directive placeholder towards a better breakdown of words that commonly, have an L. Whether you spell it with an L or say it with an L is largely, in the scope of this show and my interests, quite relevant. Though, at the time, one of my favorite word placings with this presented title was actually apiLeast'r. And I mean it towards the Land Before Time reference of a tree star, the life-giving and tasty opportunity that Littlefoot and his species cherished at the time, but as apiLeast'r. And a plea is a judicial action that is centered around asking for almost forgiveness, but more of the pardoned sense. And within one's admission towards, again, one's own forgiveness. And I think you can also look at it as apiLeast'r. And if you think about the APIL, there is kind of the word apple. And it's like apiLeast'r. And then you might also hear that there's a least involved. So I look at this word and I think, okay, well, it's almost like careful or thoughtful. But it has least, or some, like a careless, but it's careleast. But it's apiLeast'r. So API was the real catalyst for this episode. And if you're unfamiliar with what API is, it is a computer term, programming term, that I believe stands for an applied program interface. I'm speaking off of a short memory there, but it connects programs together. The API largely is a way for programs to work different stratifications of the computer's operation together. And in my day-to-day, I've found that thinking about a front end and a back end, you've maybe heard front end programming and the back end programming, and what really occurs between those two. I think of my own actions within a front end programming, and I think, gosh, well, what is really going on behind the scenes? What is driving my actions from a deeper set? I think technology, as much as physics and other sciences, build a knowledge towards what really is there. The opportunity to create analogy and use the different advances of different scientific realms of interest comes to different connective and, kind of tectonic forces at times. I'm trying to say that there's like a compilation, but there's even so more like a conflict. I don't want to say a conflict, but two things that are driving together. And as the API in this case can be presented as a force of nature. We can observe the ways that can be applied. I kind of want to lean towards the fact that this word, one of the big parts that I think is really interesting about it is that it's kind of like a word center, is what I'm reaching at, I think, with my intuitions on it. That different word sounds can sound the same. And I have understood from a by chance article and source of information that I can't put a finger on right now, though it might go, I think it came from Jordan Peterson podcast, now that I give it some clear sight. And it has to do with the Tower of Babel, and that the calamity that is so organically, and out of that, I'm saying that it's like the perfect sin, the original sin almost, that humans have to find their penance amongst. That as words are developed and there exists a hierarchy amongst the society in which they're used, the divides that are formed out of our competition can largely tear at the fabric of our communicative language, and that words begin to lose their meaning. And that is the utmost worry fault of this original sin, as I understand it, that in the fall of that society of the Tower of Babel's construction, that all words begin to lose their meaning, and it becomes just this babble. That, as we know, it's like the babbling brook. There's kind of the baby talk almost of it all, and it's, well, where's that regression occurred? And the meaning still can be hearkened, I think, as I want to explain how much with my cats there is an absolute babble, but even with my hamsters, as I work with their intelligences and try and get into the reality that they might be able to understand or observe the understanding they have, with their natural inclinations and instincts. The loss of word meanings can occur, I think, with kind of like this word center that I wanted to point out about this word. There's even the April kind of instance of it as the APIL. If you add the R in the middle, I'm interested in words that start as a 4-letter word and then you put a word or letter in the middle, and then it surfaces towards this 5-letter word. And ironically, the least is a great word for that, because both lest and least and the best and the beast, the A's amongst those kind of words operate in a way that is decidedly of your time. But in the primary focus of this episode, there is much to be still uncovered. And with further parsing of words, I hope you find deeper and deeper interest in doing so. Another breakdown of this word is the latter half of this. So if you keep the API at the front, which hopefully is something that can rest on your mind as still, again, the primary focus towards this episode's operations, that then the latter half is the 𝘵𝘮𝘰𝘲, and then the R. So try and picture that for a second, the L and then east, and then the R at the end. I want you to imagine that left and right now, that L and that R with the east in the middle, and then maybe put west instead of the east. And to think about the ways that that volatile little structure then, changeable, right? The changing, the morphable form of that can create different meanings. The one that struck out to me was the lowercase l on the left, and let east, and then the capital R, as what I said upon first observing it was a vitality hold. And so it's sort of maybe, okay, well, is it Eastern? Well, east is to the right on the cardinal directions too. And the capital R then at the right side of it would be performatively something with a little bit more stability and true meaning to it. The lowercase r is sort of half performing, same as the L without its base point as a capital. I would argue that there is something that takes more of an objective nature in its form. But as a vitality hold, and this altogether apiLeast'r, an API with a vitality hold, what does that sort of make you think? It kind of makes you think, okay, well, so there's this connectivity within our programmings that has something that is honestly conservative, I think, is where I was actually saying more from a vitality standpoint. It's still reaching out, but it's only at its least form, even. And a right, and a left, there's something characteristically logical about something being its true form. It's not lying, so to say. It is performing at its fundamental level. If you know about matrices, the cross products, while still interesting, while still very mathematically tied to the rigor of any equation involving them, it's the eigenvalues that are deduced by finding the diagonal matrix, and not to get towards that entirely, but it is those diagonal elements, like in a phenotype kind of Punnett square, is it that the dominant and the recessive, right, might also be of interest here. It's still interesting when you get those cross products. That's where more adaptations eventually, but abnormalities, I've lost the word a little bit, I think, but those morphological fronts are, again, still key towards what I think this apiLeast'r apiLeast'r is going to get to. But within and without the fact that words are tied in a web towards the communicative functions, that are there to be so vitally forward thinking. Without apiLeast'r, apiLeast'r, and maybe if you can just hold amongst all of that, still then apiLeast'r, we're pleased, waiting to find a better place on earth. And so that's why I think we hear this word for this episode, and to further point the first chapter. This is me, and we need me. I have certainly my own gripe about where in which my strife finds a better place, and I have largely loads more than I can ever consider of my own confusions about what I'm doing and why, and the senses in which I have derived my own life's journey are ones that I necessitate a deep faith and a constancy of said faith. And my whole life revolves around the differences in faith that I observe. And when such confusion arises, I hope that you could picture how much there is a reaching for the bottom of our experienced commonalities of a barrel that decides into where we judge each other. And as we think about this whole episode kind of still with this programming computer language schema, this network of meanings, there is a sense to say that, okay, well, I guess I'm partitioned in the scope of a lot of what I wish I was more a part of. And the common suffering that we have is the other end of the coin towards the fact that different aspects can create this kind of feeling amongst us. But another one of those bottom-barreled ideas that is immediately present towards this first one, where I am seeking the deeper sense towards the double-sided coin here that is our common suffering and the lack of closeness towards what I feel needs to be in alleviation. It's more of the noun aspect towards it, more of this total kind of restoration again, or the the total concept I'm really trying to reach for with the alleviation there is that we need to operate on, and I'm saying this with some hesitation because I'm curious of where the paths of understanding are leading right now, but I am confident in saying that this next one is that I believe that we need to be listening to everybody. And as I wrote this chapter, this is me and we need me. I hope it would almost stand as a protestable kind of concept. We had the No Kings protest recently, and as much as I try and stand amongst the aisle, it's like, okay, well, yeah, no kings. That's right. Some things can appear a little bit authoritarian in this day and age, but it is a great distaste to me to also see how much there is the scapegoating of Donald Trump as well. And that as much as it is a whole party and largely the majority of the country voting so democratically, desiring certain political changes, that it all gets brought amongst just a me. And we need me, but there has to be the coin, maybe, and to coin a term, right? I mean, is within this next idea I'm coming to insight with, that the balance of me and we, that a coin isn't a coin without it being something that can't even exist, right? That the physical property, again, of it is destroyed. But the knock-knock aspect of this for me actually drove is not a word, but I will jump back and say drove itself, possibly, I'm going to tell you I would be confident about saying drove itself out of the fact that, like, I am a word center. Like, I am losing my meaning day by day. And this construction of apiLeast'r is like me. When I saw it as this thing that is like filled with a few different parts, it definitely has one thing, and if you change the format of one part of it, okay, well then that's when it sort of is a little bit different shaped and acting. And right now, we need these word centers, I think. And we need to stop looking at, okay, well, this is like what one group of people thinks about the way that this word means, and this is what another word of its center can derive into the reality of each other from that other side, or a different side, however many different sides there are. And that we need that, though. And the censorship, the different reasons for such, are things that we need to really take to heart, because it's unfortunately, with the right kind of metaphor and analogy, without having it perfectly prepared, I don't have the best one. But we must know that there is this kind of thing happening, and we need to formulate our opinions organically, but without such confidence that we know everything, right? As a very common kind of end goal of this is kind of strikes a previous sort of thought that there's kind of like a bottom of the barrel kind of point in that we're diverse, and we have diverse experience, we have diverse input and diverse output. And as much as we, as I've said, are forming a more cherished identity with things, that we are in a time period where being you and the pride kind of theology, where I am my own special person, is something that is very attractive to people of today. We need to incorporate, still, and to not detract with the knowledge that we have so many people that are thrown off and discombobulated because of that same kind of construct. And this episode started off with, we were at war, and the different words that we come up with to create definition, and as much as they might need to represent who we are and our freedom of choice and the ephemerality, a word that has like this quality kind of, and all be so brought to say that this apiLeast'r, try and think of the word apparent and then apiLeast'r. There is something saying that it's not parent, it's the least, right? So it's like, it sort of goes more towards this sense that it's like the A, P, and then the least. And then don't think about it as like the ER, because I really didn't want to have the E in the title here. So it's maybe just start with apiLeast'r. And it's almost like apiLeast'r. It's not like we're being policed with this, but there still is the knowledge that there's the policeman of our spirit keeping, right? And then towards the apparent again, as I was going, the apiLeast'r, or I don't know if you should say that R at the end there, but I was saying that we need to be representing our experience through our words and through the definitions and through the freedom of choice again. And I was going towards the fact that this word then, within its confusion, can right itself. And I wanted to touch back towards the ephemerality if you didn't catch it too. And this is a heavy sense of burden for me at the moment, but forward towards the fact of so many of my writings and the poems, one of the biggest things that is overarching, it's like the barrel almost, is that as you begin to become more mediumistic, the ephemerality of what you're saying can be paramount, and especially when it is in a static form and lacking some of the energy that can be conveyed through speaking, and that there can be the fluidity. Maybe this can then lead into a bridging of the gap that the fluidity of our genders needs to be occurring right now, because within that fluidity there is the great melding of spirit that right now, with what I will continue to describe through the different current events and the things that strike me, the threatening aspects of our spiritual being are deriving this need for this kind of fluidity. And it is the ways in which we are adapting with a lack of attention towards things like our data keeping and the ways in which we are totally splashing around this pool of our history right now with that and other things. We can know, I think, definitively that what we see is what we need. As this chapter started, this is me, and we need me. The API holiday. This is the interpretation of the apiLeast'r. And might I remind you, Easter is the day that we realize that Jesus is the Son of God and he has rose from the dead. And with that extended more generally as a holiday, somewhere where we recognize that with an API construct, a holiday, and where I'm saying it's not a holiday, I think is not needed. And actually, by the definition of this word, that apiLeast'r, it's actually saying that it's the least of an API. And to revisit the API construct in that regard, you would say, okay, well, if there is like different programs and it needs an API to interface, or the back end and the front end, they need like the connection within a deeper data set, mainframe. With apiLeast'r, it's saying that, okay, well, no, within everything together, it's actually nullifying the API construct. And within a holiday ideal, the API holiday might then again be something that is kind of sacrilege, counterintuitive towards what is so servicing of society. And again, hearkening towards the chapter's mainstay, there is a sense of the light being turned on here. So, working into that, I think the light being turned on, not by the chapter's title, but by the word would reveal some degree of the fact that apiLeast'r in its shifting form again is to bring about this sense towards the least, again with apparent apiLeast'r, as something that is being enacted towards the full total spectrum, with everything else in its vicinity, to reveal much of what we've seen already as this sense that the fluidities and the consequent need for those, as everything works itself out in the catastrophe of R, per these other instances of threat, that holiday is at its what's the word? Its turn. And I think you could re-reference the fact that within the interpretation of it being an Easter, and then thinking, okay, well, no, it's more truthfully enacted again towards a whole different form. And holiday is something that stands amongst our calendar as something to reobserve and to, again, re-pledge of allegiance, like last episode, towards the main idea, right, of what that holiday stands for. But what I'm scratching the surface of is that, well, are holidays exactly so servicing us in the coming change? How much do we need to reevaluate what is operative in this data age as opposed to the last data age? And that's a little bit of a rabbit out of my hat, frankly. But I don't think that this is about a holiday. And for the reasons why, I think the concept of an API is actually something that we need to put to a constant end of the programming. The idea that there's this back end, like, truthfully, from the outset of this chaptered, approached podcast called apiLeast'r, is actually the deep state. And for the hard runaround of it all, the front end of my runaround is always at that attempt within myself to pull myself into the right degree of the war that needs its well-met conclusion. But not it is the API denigration. Nothing more to say. This is a little bit more of a general chapter, towards our linguistics, towards our vocabulary, and points towards what I've realized is how many other great words there are, such as those that you'd hear in the spelling bee maybe, that are totally outside the normal usage of the general population. And it also leads right into an idea of how much we need new words. And speaking of the spelling bee, how much there's already been that realization that we need this new sense of definition to our daily. As we work within our jargons, there are the words that we use more and applicably so, but is there really nothing more to say? I wrote the more in parentheses, which I treat more as a conditional. So if more was conditional in that way, it's operating towards the nothing to say form of its nullification, where if we're saying generally that to say something is what you're doing or what is happening, if we've run out of things to say, there is maybe the conditional sense of, well, then what are we doing? What are we saying? And so for there to be more to be said, there's the awaiting creativity of what exists there to hopefully flourish into what comes next. And hopefully what comes next is not what has already come. Though nothing more to say other than being something that is a little bit of a call to action about what we hope to create in the coming years, I think is a good center on this word center idea, because as we exist within an abstraction of what we're talking about, within the perspectives and them constantly changing, there can always be what hasn't been said. And if we do exist in kind of this Tower of Babel conflict where words are losing their meaning and we don't necessarily come to this middle of where different tribes are trying to define their world with different value sets of those words, I think as a response to resolve that kind of stalemate, there is again this sense of fluidity, and why we would be losing the sense of our words would be a reason why we'd be losing a sense of our identity. Largely, I think one of the reasons why that stronghold of the LGBTQ community founded on the need to change something and to experience what that change might be purely for the sake of there being a sense of stepping forward and to giving reason to some of the far more constructively detrimental aspects of society are the true cause of. And that's going to be something that is more contested within those perspectives, because I'm effectively discounting the fact of that kind of gender-based identity change and effectual nullification of what's really there, I think it's kind of a placebo, frankly. And that's kind of my ascertainment. It's kind of my general proactive point on my first kind of conclusion to be drawn about where some of those oddities are coming from. That it services this held and truly painful aspect of people's lives that they are being told is answered by a change in their identity and their preferences. But I don't think it is answering exactly the problems at hand. And I'm not well versed to speak amongst the different ideologically total perspectively challenged points that are driving at this sense that our gender roles are really flawed for our current coming of normalities. But the mouthful of it is that there's already so many problems with the way that the males and the females of our society are interacting, and there are reasons to say that everybody is going to suffer from them until we find the proper solutions to them. But so the solutions may be, it doesn't mean that they are truly what is going to be so saving of those initial problems. And we're experiencing some technical difficulties. I'm going to try and get that next segment change loaded. But it's the lock. It's the unlock that we need. And this week I am most trying to point out that contract servicing with predation is something that is rampant amongst today's society. And as we have such a litigated reality that is largely business focused, there is going to be obviously the potential shortcomings and worse, the vampiric and predatory aspects that can occur out of those. And so contract servicing, trying to uphold and fulfill the values of a contract, are natural rights that every citizen must follow. But as much as there can be predation, there will be. And within contract servicing, the points that can be emphasized are going to be found where a competition is at hand. So there needs to be resolution towards the competition of our species before there can probably be an elimination of that kind of predation, because it'll happen naturally, and as we need to exercise our abilities over another to gain and earn the rights to a certain type of lifestyle over another, there will be the means to do so, right? As the antidote to that kind of trouble, there is possibly the sense to say that so many of us, I think, want to live in harmony, and there is that type of welfare cited by those that believe that there is the right place for people, and the rising of our efforts to attain the livelihoods that we can is crucial towards our development and our experience as humans that do need to prove ourselves. There are always seemingly the people that believe that there is the obvious tenure of those that need to take the advantage that they can to earn the livelihood that they can. It's a very difficult topic, but within apiLeast'r and the unlock here, I think that as we understand how to need less and less of the API construct of this whole episode, that I think that competition sort of thing and the litigious efforts of those contracts, as much as they operate to help bridge the gap and connect the programming of the companies, of the government, to the people that are in service of them, might we come to a better place with where in which those contracts can be predated with. We revolutionize the sect of our religiousness towards the economy, and can learn to live with the blessings of our natural born gift to cohabit a world that is value driven and principally stated in such a way that apiLeast'r is a constancy and something that is constantly refining. The card shuffle, somewhat of a saving point towards regaining our sanity here with the tough topics. I know that out of my practices, I truly take on the struggles in which they are a gaining. Number 1 this week, target truce. That truce idea. That sense that as we understand our fire powers and all of our efforts to do what we want truly come to meet those of the oppositional players, actors, countries, as we find conflict with those in our world with a right to meet us at the sites of our desired coming, there is the truce idea. And target truce, again, is where we might find that there is a peace, there is a laying down of our weapons and a mutual understanding of this is what I'm going to do and this is what you're going to do. And there is much to be grateful for in the fact that our society has only developed and succeeded out of the honesties and a long-standing truce within our evaluations of our work by contracts. Though, again, I'm seeking the further points here that we need to continue striving towards what deeper realities they hold, because there's nothing more to say, and as much as we have an API as primary elements to this whole episode and their consequences, we will suffer until we can get better definition over the aspects of a truce, maybe, that we don't have quite a finger on. Number 2, find that MOP historically. This is a hard point to explain without much into kind of a quasi-hypothetical realm of where historically I'm talking right now, but I am speaking of the MOP as the massive ordnance penetrator, the huge bomb that has the capability of driving into the ground in the means that so classified. I did hear that there is some possibility that several bombs hit in the same area as well, more or less consistently, and that kind of helps dig amongst it, because I mean, for one, I could not understand how a bomb would possibly drive itself almost 200 feet into the ground. But the particular MOP that I'm speaking of with the Iran conflict and that's effort, there's unfortunately, I think, far too much discussion over its minimization and its simplicity, because I think it's one of the most serious attacks that has occurred in our history. And the primary point being that as much as it could be used to develop a nuclear bomb, and there are other scientific areas of the world in which those scientists can go and work amongst, it's a huge destruction of a lot of hard work. And where do we start to value that hard work and exemplify a trust? Many times they and proponents of it will qualify that Iran says that everything they ever want to do is to destroy Israel, and within the religious construct and point of view, they, with their God, the Muslim God, it is within Allah. The salvation of their people revolves around setting back what Israel has done in that part of the world. So there is the endless conflict with a static religion, a static religious set still. But historically, where did that MOP occur? And has it been established for the thousands of years in which that conflict has existed? I have said in a post recently that I will say, God willing, right back to those people of Iran. And if we are all to look under a consistent God, there needs to be an understanding that that kind of prophecy is flush and connected. But where have each of those religions falsified and fell short of their supposed claims of proper fruition, I think needs to be considered. But where do you find that MOP historically? Number 3, multi-purpose. This idea was a cool idea to me in that the well-roundedness of our individualities can occur in a multi-purpose state. And we need to continue to support the well-roundedness of our people, because in a multi-purposed sense, as our jobs in our world evolve, and very interestingly, this is very much like a fluidity kind of standpoint, I think we're going to find that some of our jobs are still very needed, but some aspects of normal jobs will be far less important as time goes on. And well, within like the partitioning of one's time, I'm thinking of this in the sense of, okay, well, somebody is both the security guard and they also take care of the maintenance. And that's something that is very personal to me as someone that has worked in a security sense and seen how much some very basic maintenance need to occur to actually enforce the security. And the maintenance wasn't getting done. And it's like, you know what? I would love to find a job where I could feel a little bit more well put together. And with the bigger title of, okay, well, I am a property security manager. And there are those jobs, and I think I could still attain that kind of position with time. But that kind of idea, I think, really needs to find its way around, because I just have a good feeling about that type of moving forward, that some jobs don't require as much time, but it should allow us to work in other capacities. Number 4, disabled. And so disabled is even actually towards where I felt disabled, and the lead at the end was just the light for this insight here, where some people will have a disability that allows them to focus more on something else. And the way that I see our spiritual connectivity with things, that sometimes they become, the individual that is supposedly disabled, they will become so fluent and so talented at what they are essentially then led to, that within God, the all-tiding, that disability that's brought upon them is totally without any sense of its dis. They're truly able to do the final wonderful contribution to the world purely out of their disability, I'm saying. So where are we led to, though? And how much is there more to learn about the disabilities, and how much those people are being led to positions that they didn't necessarily need to be disabled for to go get to, but upon that sense of what we see is what we need. If we could prevent a disability by understanding, okay, well, we need to know that this population of people that are becoming well prepared for this kind of work and service, God is asking for. So let us all understand that that is what we should lead people to. Number 5, conditioning unhappiness. And as a prophylactic, this topic is one that is close to home because I feel like I myself am conditioned to unhappiness for the point of my better functioning and my better empathies. And I think that's most why I want to point it out, because unfortunately it leads me to think that people that are too happy stand at a risk of that when they are not in a similar type of conditioning. And so are we going to say that that kind of conditioning is something that we should all be bringing into our lives? Or, because it's sort of that side of the coin thing for me, where it's like, okay, well, then it's creating this other situation where you're not conditioned to unhappiness, and within proper action, I think it then stands a threat. So it's kind of like, overall, there's a competition. The people that are led towards like a constructive unhappiness and realization to the world are then supposedly at an advantage. But if we are creating that whole system, I think there's something wrong. You know, it goes to so much of the political dialogue lately too, where it's like, well, we are fundamentally attacking this with the wrong purpose. Purpose. That's something I say in my intro, and the purpose. Where did I say it differently there? Whenever I say a word many times, I try and think, okay, well, in that context, it might have been a little different. You never say the same word twice. But that's also a very heavy topic, too. And maybe it was servicing in truth towards something worse than my reaction there I'm realizing a little bit how much I am talking about some very, very deep topics, and sometimes I don't necessarily realize how realistically heavy they are until I get to them. So I apologize for that, and I hope you can bear with the sense that it's topics that I think need the voice of what it is, and like the understanding and the understood. Like in creating that attempted dialogue, I'm hoping to balance some sense of, okay, well, if I'm understood, like, you will know about these sort of things that I'm concerned about, and then I can try and understand more of myself out of feeling like I shouldn't be understood as such in a personal point of view there, but to understand other people being the goal. Number 6, store brand serial numbers. This big idea, I really wanted to more angle towards the fact that there are misleading opinions in a disguised fact. And the disguised fact of this store brand and serial numbers is much out of an insight of store brands being something kind of like an entertaining hot topic, because within the meme world there is a joke that, okay, well, we have these at home, but it's the store brand. And well, within serial numbers, I think cereal is a very common store brand kind of twist towards that center of a thought. And well, so serial numbers are used to track things, they're used to order things. Do the store brands have more fluid serial numbers? You know what? If you're not a store brand, a lot of times it takes a strong effort to even have a serial number in rounding out this idea. But within that kind of assumption, there's still that point that, is there anything really that different about store brand serial numbers? And as a store brand, there is the supposed advantage towards having that ability to mark down the prices because of the passing of goods between hands and the ability to mark down the total cost. But is there really the difference there? I think the thing that I'm trying to hearken amongst this point is that there's really nothing different there. And sometimes we'll see facts that are flat. They do not impart a change. Number 7, it takes far more. This actually started out as that phrase exactly. It takes far more. But as much as I think about more, you more, you attach a boat to a moor at a lake, a M-O-O-R. And it takes those far more in the transgression of one's experience to find truth and meaning. And right now, with this fluidity, where I really wanted to add this in, is that we are so stretched but compressed within the changing of our time right now. But it truly does take far more. It takes more that are very far away for there to be the right kind of balance within our bodies. We're far more sacredly ordered towards a time scale that is not ready is not present as much in today's shifts. Number 8, I'm happy this is the last one because it's another really sort of big idea into the deeper sense of what graze is. So this 8th point is graze, in quotes, by intervention. So the word graze popped up to me recently, and I hear the word raise in it. So to lift up and to heighten. And with the G at the front and what that creates in one's feeling, there's a solid standpoint. It's sort of one of those vitality holds, I think, if you think about the word graze, right? And I think about the cows and the pastures in which there is the full ability for them to graze properly, and that they should exist cohabitually with the grass in which they are grazing upon to fully enact an ecosystem there, if you will. But that's where the intervention comes in, and the intervention I'm speaking of specifically is where the farmer and the farmer, it takes far more. There's a question of far more. Is a farmer different than a farmer? Right? It's that the farmer is intervening with the cow's grazing, or the cat's grazing. If the cat could so be more than eating grass and still grazing, then we could all then be grazing with that mistake's insight. But then again, that intervention, how in which this overarching concept of graze that might be applied even to us and our businesses be intervened upon, much like a farmer can work a field with cows in such that the grazing of it is healthy. And that kind of mediation of the fields, because you can't trust a cow to not just totally trample out a piece of the pasture or wherever they are without then going on to another piece of land too late, maybe, right? Do you see that we need to understand how much we need to confound an idea of grazing with our business, and that it is only by intervention that our economics can start to not leave these deadened areas of the pasture before we all have been fed. And with that, I leave you. And what a hopefully full circle episode this has been. But it certainly touched on topics that I wasn't totally ready to accept. And I've taken my first more long break in between a couple of those sections, and I think it left a little bit of a lasting impression towards the end there. But with much said, there is apiLeast'r, and thank you for your time in digesting some of these really big and challenging points of view that I hope can only be used to help advance and bring the fruit of our labor to all, and without the sacrifices that we can't take back and wish we never had to make.